What do the NFL player grades say about the Broncos in 2025? Does Denver have a new rival rising in the AFC West? And does a singular player hold the key that unlocks another Stanley Cup for the Colorado Avalanche? All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin in the NFL as school's in session and midterm grades are in. The NFL's players have spoken amongst their respective teams and graded various different aspects of the organization, from facilities to coaching to food and nutrition and personal training. And the Denver Broncos had some pretty interesting looks. If you look at their full report card, you see a lot of positives, things like ownership and team travel, some middle tier grades there around the weight room, the training room, things like that. An interesting situation with the head coach, who got a B as a letter grade, but ranked 26th out of 32 possible head coaches. And then some, needless to say, room to be improvement as it relates to things like, quote, treatment of families and the quality and condition of the locker room. There are a handful of things, though, that I want to zero in on as it relates to these player report cards with the Denver Broncos. And I've narrowed it down to these four. And I think you see the full spectrum of great to not so great here encapsulated within these four. The Broncos did receive 3 A's on their report card, with ownership, team travel, and their nutritionist and dietitian all ranking in the top 5 or top 10 amongst the NFL. And the lowest reports, the locker room getting an F, and then you saw a C- there as well with the treatment of families. That's always an interesting one, I think, to me, because that is very subjective and really doesn't have much to do with the actual day-to-day operation of the football team itself. It has more to do with the facilities and amenities and treatment of opportunity and perk that extends to the players of the families, not the players, or the families of the players, not the players themselves. So that one, I feel like that's kind of a tough curve to grade on there for a lot of these teams, because everybody's wants and needs and likes and dislikes are pretty different. And we're talking about ancillary members of the player's family. Not to diminish the importance of that, but I give a little bit of a leery eye to that one every year when it comes out. And I think we saw a good microcosm of that here in Denver with the arrival of Russell Wilson, who was not just married to his high school sweetheart, or somebody he met in college, but he was married to a world famous pop star in Sierra. And with that was afforded a lot of amenities specific to Russ and his family that didn't really extend to, the other members, starting or otherwise, of the Denver Broncos. Bathroom access and on-field access and, chauffeuring and entourage capabilities and things of that nature. So with that one, I'm willing to maybe look the other way at a not so great grade for the Broncos in that regard. But if you look at the 3 A's they did get, there's a pretty common theme as it relates to the genesis or the starting point for those. And it actually starts with the first letter grade on the list: ownership. I think that when you look at team travel and the nutritionist, dietitian programs and facilities and access that these players have, those are all things that come directly from a branch of the Broncos ownership. And I think it's another feather in the cap of the Walton Penner Group, and specifically Greg Penner, who has not shown in any way to be what there was some fear that he might be, or others might be, prior to the sale of the Denver Broncos, which is kind of just a satellite owner. You see the wealthy business magnates and people of influence that purchase these NFL teams. It kind of depends on what their overall interest level is in how involved they want to be. You have the one end of the spectrum with like the Woody Johnsons and the Jerry Jones of the world, where the Dave Teppers, who are maybe overly involved, and I think some of their letter grades from their organizations reflect that. And then you have the opposite end of the spectrum, where they're not involved. It's really just kind of a business investment. There's financial ramifications, and you see them at the owners' meetings. You hear from bang, 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 and then it's kind of hands-off approach, and you have an underling or a senior vice president of whatever that kind of really runs the show. That's not the case with Greg Penner. In fact, I think the Broncos actually got the best of both worlds, in that they got an owner who is very involved, but also knows what to be best involved in. And for Greg Penner, that has meant writing checks and providing access to much, much nicer facilities, amenities, etc., for these players. And so I think that's why you see the ownership group for the Denver Broncos be ranked in the top 5 amongst all the player surveys. And I think it shows when you look at nutrition, dietitian, things of that nature. The Broncos were healthier than they may have been in a lot of years. And that's not to take an unnecessary shot at the training staff or anything like that, because we've seen the likes of Lauren Landau and others kind of Greek get slandered a little bit in hindsight after their careers with the Broncos were over, as it relates to some of that stuff. And that's not at all where I'm trying to go with it. But what I am saying is you are seeing the players respond in kind and positively on the field, let alone in these arbitrary report card kind of designations about the positive impacts that those are happening. And the one F that they got on that list, the locker room, and some of the lower level training facility and weight room and things like that. We already know the Broncos and Greg Penner are in the process of renovating all of that. They're in the process of spending, millions and millions of dollars in order to rebuild a new state-of-the-art facility over there at Dove Valley, rather than moving it to a different location. And we see a stadium renovation coming in the near future, which will mean even more and better amenities outside of their regular training. So I just think that the most illuminating thing for me as it relates to these player report cards that we got for all 32 teams in the NFL is that a lot of the buckets in the areas that were so sorely lacking as it related to the trust ownership group after, the mental decline and the demise of Pat Bowlen, everything that was so sorely lacking and needed attention from that particular crew, who was just kind of treading water and cashing checks to a certain degree, has been very quickly, in a span of less than 2 years, rectified and healed by the Walton Penner ownership group and Greg Penner in particular. And I think that spells a very, very bright future for the Denver Broncos. As it relates to the AFC West as a whole, it appears that once again, for a second time in maybe 2 or 3 years, there's a bit of an arms race forming in the AFC West. And we saw it first with coaches, where we saw you already had Andy Reid, and then you brought Sean Payton in. Jim Harbaugh followed in there. Jim Harbaugh came, and then Sean Payton came. And then there was a chance that Tom Brady could come to play quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders, and then Russell Wilson and all of that. So you had all this amassing of coaches and then potential for quarterbacks. And then it didn't fall through with Russ. Wasn't that great. Tom Brady obviously never played for the Raiders. So that kind of went by the wayside. But then now you have a situation where in this offseason cycle, Pete Carroll, one of the better coaches of the last decade or two in the National Football League, has come to Las Vegas. Tom Brady's a part of that minority ownership group who was responsible for bringing that in. And now we hear rumors that Matthew Stafford, the Super Bowl winning quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, who spent the majority of his career in Detroit with the Lions, may be on the move again. And the Denver Broncos division rival in Las Vegas is once again brought up as a strong potential for the landing place for Matthew Stafford. And we heard that from NFL insider Jordan Schultz, who reported earlier this week that Raiders minority owner Tom Brady recently hosted Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford at his home in Montana, where they spent time together and went skiing. Brady has been actively trying to convince Stafford to join the Raiders, and discussions are ongoing. And it's important to note that, one, Matthew Stafford was given permission by the Rams to seek trade partners along with his agent and things like that. So he's been given permission. There's nothing above board there. I do find it a little wink, wink, nod, nod that Tom Brady, the notion that was floated by other insiders that Tom Brady and Matthew Stafford had a chance encounter at the ski chalet in Minnesota or Montana or whatever it was. That seems like a pretty random occurrence. I mean, we were already raising eyebrows when Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford happened to share a drink tableside at a resort in Cabo. And at least with Cabo, that's a vacation destination that you could plausibly assume that NFL offseason, participants may frequent. But Montana at a ski resort? I mean, of all the places to ski in the country, nothing against Montana, but shout out Colorado. So I just find that a little bit, pull the wool over the eyes that it just happened to be a chance encounter. But besides that, I think this is very relevant because The Raiders bringing in Pete Carroll is a sign from that ownership group with Mark Davis and Tom Brady that they are ready to turn things around fast. And we're all on the heels of celebrating a rookie season with Bo Nix, where the Denver Broncos turned things around significantly quicker than we expected, especially when you look back at the 8 years they had previously. So let's not be naive and think that the Las Vegas Raiders, who are currently in the basement, in the cellar of the AFC West, can't replicate a similar formula if they hit on the things that the Broncos just hit on. They found Sean Payton, their coach. They tried it with Russell Wilson. It didn't work. They immediately hit, it appears, or have a chance to hit on Bo Nix. So the Las Vegas Raiders bring in Pete Carroll. I think there's a reasonable resume of success there that would allow you to speculate that that's going to be a decent tide steadying hire for Las Vegas. And if they're able to bring in a quarterback in Matthew Stafford, who, yes, he's on the north side of 30, in his mid-30s there, but he won a Super Bowl in 2021, and he was a couple of throws away from beating the Philadelphia Eagles and being in the Super Bowl this past year, at least for an NFC championship. So let's not pretend like Matthew Stafford doesn't have enough gas left in the tank to be a threat. And then you're a situation where you're the Denver Broncos and you maybe outkicked your coverage a little bit at a 10-7 wild card berth, and you're trying to follow up and stack that in year 2. And now you have to face another year of Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert, another year of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And now you want to throw in another wild card with potentially Pete Carroll and Matthew Stafford. I think this is a very potentially offseason shattering move, or a seismic shift that could impact the entire trajectory of the offseason, because where Stafford goes, a lot of other dominoes will start to follow. Other free agents could continue to be attracted to Las Vegas, and you could see kind of a magnet effect there. It impacts the first 10 or 6 to 10 picks in the NFL draft. If Las Vegas brings in Matthew Stafford, it probably takes them out of a quarterback in the top 6, which means that there's positional players that may or may not be available for the Broncos, who are picking on the back half of the first round. So I think this is a really interesting thing to keep tabs on and keep an eye on as it relates to how this offseason is going to play out and what the Broncos are going to be up against in an already difficult AFC West without this move taking place. And for those who might be questioning the validity of Jordan Schultz's reporting and things of that nature, as Ian Rappaport just learned, catch him outside. If you find yourself near a Starbucks and Jordan Schultz, look the other way. Because now if I were you, if you really had those thoughts and you want to avoid it, maybe consider a Dunkin' Donuts or a Tim Hortons or a Caribou Coffee. But Jordan Schultz, the son of former Starbucks CEO and current NFL insider, clearly felt comfortable about his reporting, especially on his home turf with a pike roast in hand. As it relates to the Colorado Avalanche, I just couldn't believe that story, man. Getting in a screaming match and an almost physical altercation at a Starbucks at the Combine over reporting about where a quarterback may or may not have accidentally or not accidentally met up with Tom Brady. Regardless, the Colorado Avalanche got a nice bounce back at home last night against the New Jersey Devils. It was the first home game they've played in almost a month, if you can believe it, with the Four Nations face-off break and then a couple of roadies to start the next half, or not next half, but the last half of the season here. And they got Valeri Nichushkin back. And watching, Val didn't have the biggest night in terms of a stat sheet or a box score impact. He had 5 shots and about 18 minutes of time on ice. But if you just watch them, you can tell how different they look with Val on the ice, period. And we've gone over the statistics about how they're a north of 700 win percentage team with Valeri on the ice and a 500-ish team with him off of it. So we're talking about 0.2 of a point in win percentage difference that one singular player can make. We've gone over all of that. And this wasn't even, in my opinion, true Valeri Nichushkin, who wasn't even playing in his normal spot after being out for almost 2 months, since New Year's Eve when we last saw him. He didn't even make it on the power play unit until one of the last power plays in the game, and he was kind of working his way up back into his normal spot. But even with that said, it just had me sitting there questioning whether or not Val Nichushkin is truly the key that unlocks another Stanley Cup for the Colorado Avalanche. I think even with Val, they face a little bit of an uphill battle with some of the transitioning that they've made. They've shored up some things on the goaltender front. They dealt Mikko Rantanen, but it feels like Marty Necas is finding more and more groove and rhythm playing alongside Nathan MacKinnon and being a part of that top six. And I do think that production is going to level off a little bit. But with Valeri Nichushkin, whether you want to call it an X factor, and you've got Cale Makar anchoring things on the defensive end with Devon Taves, is Valeri Nichushkin, does he have the largest weight on his shoulders as it relates to the pressure of bringing a championship to his respective organization? And you could make a parallel with perhaps Jamal Murray and the Denver Nuggets, because I think we all know that Jokic is the sun that the Denver Nuggets orbit around. But Jokic can be the great player that he is, and it still only has a ceiling. Even as great as Nikola Jokic is, the greatest basketball player on earth and probably one of the 10 greatest basketball players ever to dribble a ball in the United States of America, that ceiling is limited based on how far he alone can take them. And that's why it's been so important and stressful at times watching the roller coaster nature of Jamal Murray's performance and how we see flashes of that championship Jamal, and then it pivots back down into a level of play where you recognize that that's a player who's never made an all-star appearance in his professional career. So Jamal perhaps could have an argument. I think it's a little unfair to put, like, if I was to put a player on the Broncos, like Bo Nix certainly comes to mind. I think it's a little unfair for him to be put in that position right now in year two, because the Broncos are not a true bona fide guaranteed Super Bowl contender, in my opinion, whereas the Nuggets and the Avs, who've both done it in the last 5 years and are perennially proving to be at that level, have a little bit more of a case. But in my opinion, I do think Valeri Nichushkin holds that strongest weight on his shoulder as it relates to keeping the ceiling for the Colorado Avalanche as Stanley Cup champions, not Western Conference final appearance or second round playoff appearance or things of that nature. I'm curious, as always, to get your thoughts on it. So if you agree with me, disagree with me, feel free to chime in. But that's kind of where I'm at with it, because when you watch him, and again, this wasn't even the true Val that we know and we have seen, especially in a postseason setting. And there's always that anxiety in the back of the head about whether or not he's going to be able to maintain it. But he truly does just make the Colorado Avalanche an entirely different team on the ice physically, as it relates to how they're able to structure their lines and spread out some of that depth. But I think mentally too. I mean, think back to when they traded for Scott Wedgwood, who was the first goalie brought in during the revamping of that room by Chris McFarland. Wedgwood comes in, they get a win, and you just felt like there was energy on the ice from McKinnon and from Val and from Makar and the like. They gave him the big silly hat, and they're throwing water in the locker rooms on him and things of that nature. And that just wasn't what we saw with Georgie. So I do think that Valeri Nichushkin provides that emotional, that mental just spark for the Colorado Avalanche that makes them believe again that they can achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And I think it'll just be so important for that to maintain and remain if the Avalanche are going to make another run at a Stanley Cup this season. And that doesn't even factor into decisions that they may or may not make at the deadline, or should or shouldn't make. And that's another conversation that we're going to be having over the course of the next week or so, as the deadline is just a week or so away. So I thank you so much, all of you, for Mel and John and others who have joined in and chimed in. I appreciate all of you for chiming in every day. I can't wait to look forward to talking to you again at the same time and same place tomorrow.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the